Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming today. This was quite impromptu, as Dr. Brett was down here to do pictures all day today for the new upcoming 914 Restorer's Guide to Authenticity. As you all probably know, Brett is the world's leading authority on the Porsche 356, and he's just launched his new book called the 356 Restorer's Guide to Authenticity. Now very, very colorful and full of information that nobody knows, nobody maybe even cares to know, because it's down to minutia. The different script of the Bosch horns. But Brett is famous for that, along with many other automotive books that he's written in the past. What you probably don't know about Brett, or maybe some of you do know, that he is one of the leading veterinarians in Indianapolis, Indiana. His dad started the clinic, and Brett continued it till this day, and his business has actually blossomed as more and more people are bringing their pets to Brett's clinic, as he remains working every single day as usual, because he's got a tremendous work ethic, where others closed because they were afraid of, catching something from their pet, who knows. So, in addition, he restores carousels from amusement parks and circuses. He's done quite a few. He rescues them. He rescues the carousels, he gets them reconditioned, and then it's a non-profit company, so he lends them out to parks and municipal parks and recreation areas that couldn't afford to buy a regular carousel. And these are old carousels from the 30s, some of them extremely famous ones that he has resurrected from the dust. And then also, Brett got into the 356 arena, first going to college in England, and always loving the old 356s, found that there were parts in Europe that he could import into the United States and make a hefty profit on it. He first started doing 356 carpet kits back in the early 70s while in college. Somebody in Hungary or Yugoslavia, one of the Eastern Bloc countries, made a carpet kit that looked, or the carpeting on the roll, that was identical to the original 356 wool carpeting. So he bought this stuff by the roll. He couldn't actually buy it directly from them because it was Eastern Bloc, so he brought them into London, where he then forwarded them on to Indianapolis, cut these kits, and sold them for $175, which nobody could believe you could buy a 356 carpet kit that was so authentic looking for $175, but yet he was making $125 a kit when everybody else's were $300. Well, that started him thinking that if I make some more products and I do some sheet metal for these cars, I can really have a great business. Before you know it, Peter and his older brother Brett, Brett and his older brother Peter launched PB Tweaks, Peter Brett Tweaks. Tweaks was some daffy English, whatever Brett will tell you about that was wildly successful. Before you know it, they had 3 branches, Indianapolis, California, and here in Atlanta, and sold many. They were the leading 356 parts reseller through their catalog back in the early and middle 70s, even beating Performance Products at their game. Well, finally, unfortunately, like my brother and I, Brett and Peter had a falling out, and that ended Tweaks. Tweaks was sold and was never the same without the vaulting enthusiasm of this guy and his brother. So today, Brett is writing books. He also races in vintage racing. He has different cars other than 356. I think he races a Lotus as well, but he can tell you all that. So without further ado, I present Brett Johnson.
I'm going to sit down because I've been standing all day. I don't race anymore, and there's a lot of things I don't do anymore, but I also don't get my hair cut because in Indianapolis we're not allowed to have our hair cut until at least next week. Anyway, I don't really want to talk about me. I'd like to talk about the book. And if anybody wants to talk about some of the ancillary things, that's fine, but this isn't really an appropriate time, I don't think. This book is radically different than its predecessors, and George showed you the one part, which is that there's color images. It also has, which were left out of the last one, he showed you that as well. It has horns, which weren't there last time, and it has oil filler canisters and other engine things. It has suspension and brakes. It has gearboxes. It has throttle linkage. And it has this really cool chart in the back. That is the best part of the book that I can't even take credit for. This is the 1952 to 1966 production by country 356s. Isn't that cool? Okay, that was from Marco Marinello. He was one of my helpers in this book, and he said, I compiled this back in the 80s, and it's never been seen anywhere else. You might as well put it in your book. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And we had to go back and redo his sums for Africa because he was off on his African ones. But the rest of it's really interesting. And as I was selling books, I need my glasses because I can't see anymore either. As I was writing, as we started selling these, I got somebody from Finland who ordered a book. Actually, I had two people from Finland order a book. And in here, the Finland totals for the entire production run of the 356 was 19 cars. And he said something, I said, they certainly sold a lot more in Sweden, where they, at the same time period, they sold 1,731 cars, and they're right next to each other. And he says, well, in that time period, we were having a lot of difficulties with the Ruskies. But the Swedes, they just bought cars. So that's why. So I learned all sorts of international intrigue with just this chart. I learned lots of stuff about engines that I never wanted to know. I'm not an expert, and there's nothing in here about the bearing sizes and stuff like that. It is primarily what the rest of the book is. It's what things look like on the outside that you're going to see when you buy a car, and what's right and what's wrong. And I had a lot of people help, especially the engines and gearboxes. Mr. Skermans was a huge help because he actually knows the stuff, and I believe him. Now, I don't believe a lot of other people. There's a lot of people who will tell you about engine lid bumpers, and there's really three types. And this one is, I don't know when they started using them and when they stopped. I have two data points of two cars that have them. They're both T2 58s. One's an early speedster and one's Neil's car in Neil's book. And that's Neil's car. Then that picture was taken by Marco Marinello and is not in Neil's book. And this is a late T2, and this is a 56 Cabriolet that's bone stock, been repainted once. I had two 56 cars within a month of each other that haven't been messed with. And those cars were a godsend because the people who had them would take pictures. Getting people to take pictures is the hardest part that I have of doing a book like this, because either people think their car isn't good enough or they just don't bother. And then after the book comes out, then they tell me what's wrong with it. And this is the second printing. The first printing arrived on the 5th of December, 3rd of December. 5th of December. It was 2 days late. They told me when I knew enough about when this book was going to be done, because it was my goal to get it out for Christmas so I could sell them and they would arrive before Christmas. And I went to, used to be Motor Books International, it's now Quarto Publishing. It's my distributor. And said, I need, I'm going to know 6 months out. I'm not going to know page count. I'm not going to know a number of pictures and things like that, but I'm going to know roughly what it is, what the content will be, what do we need to do. And they said, you need to have a sale date for when it's actually going to be ready to ship, and it needs to be on Tuesday. It needs to be on a Tuesday. I don't have any idea why it needs to be on a Tuesday. That's what they said. Tuesday, December 3rd was the day it was supposed to be done. And they came on the 5th. That's close enough, apparently, in the publishing business. They lasted me until around the 1st of February. That was the first run of 1,000. This is the second run of 1,000. There's about 600 of those left. Every chapter has a change in it. There are 4 pictures that are different than the first version. The 1963 through 1965 Carmen Coupes are in the chassis number list on this one instead of 2 sets of Reuter Coupes for that year because they got in the wrong place. So that was the biggest mistake. The chassis number list is the most hated thing in this book because it is, you have to get everything right, and it's different than the one Porsche does. And every time I do it, it's a little bit different. We lost 60 1950 356s in this edition because they didn't build them. And we can prove they didn't build them, so they had to go away. There are things like that were in previous editions where the speedsters that were supposedly built weren't built. They built them to a certain point, then they started another number series, and so the ones at the end weren't built. On the other hand, T6B coupes, they didn't have the right end number, and they actually built more of those than they had, but that was in the last book. There's engine numbers that are different in this book than were in the previous book, but other than that, the chassis number list is about the same. Color charts are the same. None of that stuff's really changed because it was pretty accurate in the first one. The detail stuff in this is much greater as far as what is discussed, when the changes are. And the thing that I learned doing this is I got a whole different philosophy on when things changed. And the last book is full of a lot of chassis numbers. And this book is full of a lot of months of the year. And the months that say May, June, or July, August, or whatever, where there's 2 months, that's where the changeover date on a assembly item is kind of in that range. Because these cars aren't assembled in order. The chassis are built in order. So if it's a chassis change, they're usually in chassis number order. But there aren't a lot of chassis changes, but there's a whole lot of assembly changes. And while it was a popular story and still is in some places, they didn't just put random parts on these cars. They changed them at a specific point, but that specific point you cannot say is a specific chassis number because they are built way out of assembly order, or they're assembled way out of chassis number order. The one thing that I ran something in the magazine about a year ago, there's a picture that's in Frank Jung's book that shows assembly at Reuter in 1953. And all the cars are sitting there, and they're all in groups of color, because that's how they came out of the paint shop. And they didn't come out of the paint shop in chassis number order. They came out of the paint shop when they painted them because it was easier to change the gun one time when you got done with that color. And that's all the way through 356 production like that. There are very few cars that were except speedsters. Speedsters were actually built in chassis number order, especially really early ones, and they're all the same color. And but they were all the same specification too. There weren't oddball speedsters; they were all the same car. And when something changed on a speedster, it didn't necessarily change on a coupe and a cabriolet at the same time, because if they had leftover stuff that they had too many of, they went on speedsters. And so the change in, like, the picture that I ran that showed that interim lid bumper is from a picture in Road and Track. And I was able to go, it's in Excellence Was Expected. And if there's credits in Excellence Was Expected, I can't figure out where they are, but they may be there. It's also in the 540 Speedster book, the one that Heinrichs did. And it's the same picture, and it's got a credit in it. And it says Ralph Poole, Dean Bachelor Collection, PCA Archives. So I called PCA, because I figure that's where the PCA Archives is. And they don't really know. But the guy who's the archivist will get back to me by email. So the PCA Archives are in Connecticut, which is where PCA's office is. I get an email from somebody who's the archivist, and he says, yeah, I think I know where those are. They're in a box, but I'm doing some remodeling, and I have to stay here, and it'll be a while before I get there. It'll probably be a couple months. He's in San Antonio. This is where you have your archivist. And he doesn't get paid for the job either. He just does that. So 2 months later, and the reason I'm interested in this picture, not only is it got this engine lid bumper, but it's a T2. It's identified as a T2. I don't have the article from Road and Track. Don Zing, is the expert on these. Don Zing's telling me, oh yeah, there's other pictures of the car. That's from this month, Road and Track, blah, blah, blah. So they get but I can see in this picture that it's sharp enough, and these Road and Track photographers are absolutely amazing, because everything in the whole, they have depth of field like you wouldn't believe. Everything's in focus in these pictures. So they're obviously taken with a tripod and a really good camera. And I can tell from the picture that if I had the picture, I could read the engine number. And I don't need the chassis number if I got the engine number, because I can find that out. So he says, yeah, I can read all but the last digit of the engine number. This is good. This means there's only 1 of 10, and it's a black Speedster. And only 5% of Speedsters were black. This is rare. How many could they have built in 10 chassis numbers? 2. Well, one of them had white wall tires and coupe seats, and this one didn't. So we knew what the chassis number of this car was. That gave me the date of the engine. But this car is a T2, and it's got wire mesh air filters on it. And T2 coupes and cabriolets that were built then had cans on them. So they apparently had too many mesh filters, so you put them on the Speedsters because you're getting rid of them. So convertible Ds, they did the same thing. 716 gearboxes were changed in like August of 58, except on convertible Ds where they kept using them until December. Because the 644 had the crummy synchronizers in it, so you put it on the cheap car. That's how Porsche did stuff. So that's the kind of fun stuff that I learned. So I've got a lot of stuff with dates on it that were corroborated by somebody who is really invaluable. Because this book wouldn't be like this without being able to verify stuff. And very early on, I got to prove to myself that they weren't really interested in Porsche at doing anything like that. And the 914 book has been just as bad, but I understand the 914 book. With the 356 book, they could have done the Cardex stuff that my Cardex guy does. But I get response in an hour or so, typically, on Cardexes. And that way I can figure out when things change and go on to something else. So, yes, sir.
Is there a reverse engine to look at?
Yeah, and gearbox.
Amazing.
Yeah. But there wasn't 10 years ago.
Right.
All there was a Cardex number. And they have apparently computerized it enough, and it was probably with optical reading stuff, because when I actually saw how they did, does anybody know Wayne Stone? He used to work at Porsche Cars North America, worked in the parts department at one of the dealerships here. He did the Cardex stuff. And at that time, I talked to him a lot at the time. I don't have a contact here anymore. But he said, they're all on microfiche, and that's what you do. That's the way you make a COA. And Brad Ripley had told me the same thing when he worked in Reno, doing the same job. Is you look at the picture, and then you write everything down. And that's still what they do. Now, they don't do that on 911s after 1968, somewhere when the Cardex system stops. And I don't know what starts then. 914s are a disaster. Because they don't have any records on, I don't know how they do the COAs on 914s. I haven't asked. When I tried to get production dates based on, there's numbers in the 914 workshop manual, or parts manual rather, that say up until this point they made window cranks this way, and at this point they changed them to this. But it's a chassis number. And so I want to put a month down because I'm into months now. And in 914s, it's probably, the chassis number stuff's probably pretty much right, because they probably weren't that far out of order by that point, not like 356s. But they don't have any data to go back and look up. He found 1 out of the 17 that he could put a date on. And so I got some from a guy who does independent Cardex stuff for people. And he does a lot of 914 stuff, and some 911 and some 356. And so he had enough data points that he could take my chassis numbers and give me a month or 2 month period. So those are all now included in the book, except for the ones that George argues about and says, no, that's wrong. It's, it wasn't done then. I can prove it. So I usually listen to him.
What was the source? Was it Parex or for the Cardex?
No, I got a guy in Southeast or Southwest that does them for me. Jurgen Barth does them for money. Marinello does them for money. I don't know if anybody else does. I assume at least one other person does. I got a guy who doesn't do them for money and doesn't sell them at all. But we'll look them up, and every now and then he sends me a copy of one if it's something really weird. We've got a car that I'm writing up for the magazine, and I'm not going to do the whole thing because I don't have enough room in this upcoming issue, because I want to use these letters that I've got from Hoffman that were an interest. The owner of the weird car sends me this copy of a letter from Hoffman that's got nothing to do with his car, that's from 1956, and it's a return letter to a guy who's written to them about putting defrosters in his 55 Speedster, which didn't come with defrosters, and so you can't put them in. And they're telling him that you can get a heated windshield, which has filaments in it, like a heated rear window, for $200. I've never heard of one that early. But the guy who's got the weirdo car has got a filamented windshield in a T5 Cabriolet, and I've got another guy with a T5 Coupe that's got them. So this is obviously something that people in Germany knew about, but it was never on the option list. So we go back and look. We had gone back to look at the options on his car because it's got some other really weird stuff, and the Cardex has nothing on it at all. It just says it is a car that was sold. It's a factory-owned car, but it's not a test vehicle, because they have two different words, and that's in the article. I don't remember what they are. But this particular car was sold to the head of sales, and it's got a removable hardtop with an electric sunroof in it. It's got heated windshield. It had a gas heater. It's got some odd vents under the rear seats that look very factory installed. But this letter, when I sent it to Don Zing, who's Mr. Early Speedster, and said, "Have you ever heard of this filamented windshield in a Speedster that's this early?" And he says, "Well, that's so-and-so's car. Didn't you get the letter from him?" And I said, "No, but I'm interested," because he sent me pictures of it, and it's a Speedster blue Speedster with 55 with a Celebast interior that has a complete original upholstery set in it, completely carpet, and it's got heater slides, which they only had until a certain point, and that's got to do with the defrosters too. But anyway, so I got off onto that and got in touch with him, and he's in South Carolina. And it's a Speedster blue Speedster. It's been repainted once, and the upholstery's original, completely, 100%. And the car's amazing. And so he had two other letters from Hoffman. So I wanted to put those in because that was what I'd started to write about, and I'm going to do this other car in the next one. But even though that other car had so many weird options, it says absolutely nothing on the Cardex. There's 5 warranty claims. There's 5 warranty mentions, 2 of which have codes and nothing else, when the car is less than 5 months old. And there's nothing else on the Cardex that said anything about it. So the guy has the history of the car. He has the German publication that has every owner of the car until his name. So anyway, that's what I do now. We do research, and if I could get people at Porsche to get excited about stuff like this, it'd be marvelous. I've got some response. The early 911 book is trailing just a little bit behind the 914 book, which is ready to lay out as soon as I get my pictures. But I've gotten some cooperation on the 911 stuff through the archives because they're a little bit more attuned to that. And, if I say, and it's, my Cardex guys only go up to 68. So I had something where there's something called a simplified differential in 68, 69, 70, 911s, and 912s. And they're a really bad thing, and you don't want a car that has one. But there's a number in the parts manual, and it's a gearbox number that says this is when we stopped using them. And I said, well, I want to know when that is. Well, the workshop manual says it's December of 1970, meaning it's a 71 change. And the parts manual gives things that are probably December 1969, and the workshop manual is probably an error. And so, yeah, he proved they were 1969. It took him 2 weeks. He said, this was really hard. I don't ask easy stuff. But he's searching, the difference with him is he's searching actual production records. And they're probably harder, and they're probably a whole lot more accurate. And there's 3 of those gearbox numbers, and one of them's a Sportomatic, and it's 2 months later than the other ones. And that's not surprising either. So, that's like I said, things don't change all at the same time. And I think if you're using up the defective bolts, you put them on the Sportomatics. So for the same reason you put them on Speedsters and you put them on convertible Ds. So this book has 921 color photos, 4 black and white, 193 images, and there has a feature called the gallery, which if you haven't paid attention to my publicity that I don't pay for, the gallery allows you to look at all the pictures online on demand, high res, whenever you want. Now you can only get that if you buy the book from us directly, or if you buy that access as a separate feature, because that is something that is on our website, and I can't sell it with a book that you buy from Amazon because I don't know who bought it. And because of that, anybody who wants to buy a book today has to write down their name and email address in a way that I can read it, so I can then go home and enter you so you can have that feature. Because if you buy it direct, the computer does that, which is really nice. The software does that. It will come with a little piece of yellow paper that tells you basically how to navigate, but it's the way it's set up, the illustrations are separate. And the illustrations that are not factory illustrations are not in there because they weren't worth doing because they're big enough to see what you're trying to see. The 2 complaints I had on the previous book, and if you go online you can read them, is that it has muddy black and white pictures and they're in black and white and they're too small. So now it has 4 black and white pictures, and they're only there because I could not get color pictures of what I wanted. One of them I had to pay for. This book includes the only photograph I have ever had to pay for use, and I had to pay Revs in Naples because they don't do anything for free anymore because they're no fun like they used to be. And it's a picture of a Marshall headlight from the Paris Exposition in 1954, and they had Marshall headlights in 356s and VWs for about 2 years, 53 and 54. They have a Marshall like a sealed beam unit sitting in the back of, it's a separate bulb unit, but it's the regular round shaped unit in the back of a Bosch symmetrical, that's an asymmetrical, the symmetrical, which has the screw holes at 1 and are at 12 and 9, and has a clear lens that's frosted at the bottom. And I've got a color picture that ran in the registry a couple of months ago that was lifted off of the internet, and we figured we could run that in the registry, but I don't do that in books. The other pictures that are in here are either Reuter family pictures or Porsche factory pictures, and they include a Lobo Speedster top, which we could not get anyone to shoot a picture of, and there's a picture that shows the painted Reuter luggage rack, and I forget what the other one is. And they're just things I couldn't get actual color pictures. I did my best to find cars to take pictures of. I don't care if the cars are great cars. People didn't want to send pictures if their car wasn't nice enough. There are people in here who I asked if I could use pictures that someone else had sent me of their cars, and I didn't have anybody tell me no. Yeah. Yeah, nobody ever asked me more than once to tell them what's wrong with their car, and they usually stop me part way through. So I know what's wrong with my car. My car's in here in a lot of places, and that's it. It shows up in a lot of places because whenever I needed a picture, it was in the garage, and it actually runs and drives like a normal car. It's a 55 sunroof. When I bought it, it didn't have a sunroof, but it really did. But the previous owner, it was a Florida car. It didn't.
Along those lines, as the 356 guys continue to age, and we try to say, why can't we get new members? We had a gentleman that I tried to recruit into the club whose dad had died, left him a 356. He showed up to one of our meetings with his girlfriend, and we were eating at a And then everybody went out to be helpful with his car. And everybody went out full of all the stuff that was wrong with his car. He never came to another meeting. So, yeah, they're meant to be driven.
That's why I don't tell people unless except at George. With George, it's a whole different thing because it's not, it's a challenge.
It certainly made an impression on me that, gee, I can't figure out why we can't recruit these guys to these clubs, right?
Yeah, well, the other part of that story is, of course, that everybody goes out and tells them the wrong thing because they didn't buy the book, and so they just know that this other guy that's got one. That's the one other thing that I've learned tremendously is that everybody knows their own car really well, but really nothing else.
And the other part of that story is his dad was one of the owners of this company called Coca-Cola.
Oh, well,
So, it was like...
He's a rich guy, Those rich guys, they changed everything.
How much more efficient is it these days with all the computer technology to put this together compared to the old ones?
Well, this is the first book that I didn't get all of my updates by mail.
We're going to get a lot of autographs.
I got all of the updates on all of the previous editions of this book by mail.
Okay.
I've started getting letters again from these old guys to send me pictures. But modern people, or semi-modern people, send me images that are digital, and digital images are amazing. Even camera pictures from phones are adequate size, and as long as they're in focus, they're just marvelous. I do have guidelines I give people for shooting pictures, and I also tell them how to send them to me, because you can't just send me a whole bunch of gigantic images, because then my mailbox blows up, and then I have to empty everything out of it. And I use WeTransfer, which is a wonderful way to send up to 2 gig. This book, the PDF for this book was 1.8 gig. And that's what I had to send the printer. And so I could send it by free retransfer still, because it would go that way. Now, after this book came out, I bought a new computer, because the interior chapter of this book, towards the end of it, the interior chapter's got 300 and some images in it. And the images you go look at online are all sized to 1 meg so that the website will work, which is what I had to do afterwards, is take all the images and make them so they were all 1 meg. So all 921 pictures got, and all the line art was the same way. It all had to be resized. It was all way too big. It would take me to open the interior chapter to make corrections at the end, which of course that's when you make all the corrections, is at the end. It would take 20 minutes to open the chapter and have the picture set. And then I could make a change. Otherwise, I had to wait till the picture's set before I can make a change. The other chapters, now takes roughly, with the new computer, that computer was 9 years old. The new computer, which I bought the fastest I could buy with it not being the professional Mac, it's still the regular iMac, but it's as fast as you can make one. It takes about 3 minutes to open that chapter. So
How
there.
quick is your page set up? When you're initially laying out to do it, is it I assume it's got to be a whole lot easier than the old days.
Yeah, I didn't ever do layout. That's what people who were trained to do things like that did. I did the first book, actually the 9/11 book. I did it. I didn't place the pictures in it. I did all the layout, but the pictures were all placed by hand. This is the first book I ever did the picture placement in myself, as I recall. I was really pleased. I was scared to death of what this was going to look like, because this is, like I said, this is digital press. This is not conventional stuff. This is state of the art, and I figured it was going to look like the digital stuff I'd seen before, and it was crap. And it's really pretty. I can't tell you can't look at this and say, oh, that's one of those digital books, because it looks just like any other printed book. It's amazing. And when I saw the proof of it, I couldn't believe it. So, yep, every one of those pictures, and they all have to be sized. They all have to be, I didn't change the actual physical size of anything except to make the picture fit the frame. it wasn't until I had to do it for the gallery that I did that. And I won't do it any differently on the other one. I like the images to be as big as possible because I know they'll look as good as possible. This headlight unit, you can see the vertical striations in it. It's a 53. It's the original light. I ran that in the registry. I ran most of these pictures in that headlight article. I'm absolutely obsessed with headlights because people are so wrong about them. And that's something that I got from, and Charlie White was my big, pain and, thorn in my side because he wrote up what's in the Porsche parts manuals as gospel. And it's absolutely completely wrong. And there's nothing in it that tells you what they changed and when they changed. And there's nothing in there that says when sealed beams appeared. And there still isn't. This car we know is original because it's got the original lights. It's an August 53 car. And he had it trucked to Monterey. There was an article about it in Panorama. He had it trucked to Monterey so he could do the concours on the street. And the trucking company broke one of the headlights. It's irreplaceable. He took it a lot better than I did. I took it really bad when he told me. But this is a picture I couldn't get anywhere else. I emailed this guy in England and said, I've got this picture of your car. Can I use this? He didn't know where I got it. Sure, that's fine. So that was one of the ones that came in the secret pictures. But I happened to know him because he had he's got all the owners' names. It's an amazing file. But, yeah. I need everything. I need everything. I need the best. What I really want, like I said, I want glamour shots with no people. I don't really care if there's other cars in the picture. I'd prefer that there wouldn't be, but those pretty much have to be shot on demand. And if anybody can do that, that's great. If you can get George to open the doors of his thing and move his cars out and take pretty pictures in the next month, that'll be great too. But that's not going to happen, is it? I can do.
And maybe some people can ask you questions about the different cars and point out things, or you look at their cars for them, or something like that.
Yeah, I can do whatever you want. I'm just here because I had to come here and take pictures of 914s.
Thank you very much.
I didn't figure anybody'd come out on a Sunday to do this, but
Thank you very much.